And there we go. Good evening, everyone. We're delighted to have you here, and we're delighted to have Michael here as well. Get to that in a moment, but first, just a couple of upcoming events. We are not disappearing for the winter, but we are continuing some programming. By the way, I'm Bill Graben, and on behalf of the board of York County Audubon, we're delighted to be able to bring you these programs, including tonight's. We have scheduled for January a program with Malcolm Hunter, who's a professor at University of Maine, focused on old forests and old growth. And we think that will be wonderful. And also on Saturday morning, February 1st, we have a winter wildlife tracking workshop with Dan Gardoki, who's an expert tracker and also a very entertaining birder and person in general.
All
So,
around great guy.
yeah. So that information is not on our website yet, but should be sometime soon. But you can keep an eye out for it. And we'll be sending out our monthly emails as well to alert you. And one other thing to mention, we do have our annual Maine birds. Let's see if I can get this in the camera. Oops.
Oh,
There we go.
there you go.
Maine Birds 2025 desk calendar that is produced for us by Marie Jordan, a former board member. It's a wonderful little desk calendar, and it's all the proceeds go to York County Audubon for programming like this. And the price is only $10 plus shipping. So if that's of interest, please check it out on our website. And now on to tonight for what is probably our first ever encore performance. Michael spoke to us, presented this program at Laudholm Farm, Wells Reserve on November 19th. It was intended to be a hybrid Zoom and in-person program, but we ran into technical difficulties and we're not able to broadcast the Zoom, or we broadcast it, but without the slideshow, without the video feed. So we are absolutely delighted that Michael was willing to come back and run through it again for us so that we can, all of you can enjoy it. And it will also go up on our website so that people who missed it tonight will be able to check it out. So without further ado, Michael, thanks so much for coming back to do this again. And it's all yours.
My pleasure, Bill. Thanks for having me. I just want to thank everybody who came back to see the visual part of this presentation, which is literally 95% of what it is. People stuck, I know a couple of friends stuck through just to hear the audio, and I'm like, okay, but you're missing the point.
Right.
So go
I
ahead.
will add one note, excuse me, that we will have an opportunity for some questions at the end. So feel free to type them into using the Q&A button during the course of the program.
Awesome. Well, once again, thanks for having me. I'm going to be talking about Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is a place that is very dear to my heart. And I just want to acknowledge that it's the traditional home of the Inupiat and Gwich'in peoples. And they use this land for subsistence still. They're still active members of the community here. So I just want to acknowledge that they're part of the ecosystem. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Boardman, wildlife artist from North Yarmouth, Maine. And I started my career as a graphic artist, doing a lot of stuff on a screen, computer stuff, at the very beginning of computer stuff, actually. And at some point decided I needed to get out and do some art in the great outside world. And I took a class from Maine College of Art at Baxter State Park and had a great time. It was watercolor. It was really fun. Got to explore messing around with art outside with all the bugs and the sun and the wind and all the other things that can be involved with that. And very soon after that, a friend of mine suggested that I should apply for an artist residency at Baxter State Park, a newly formed. It was just the second year they were having it, and there's Mount Katahdin and one of our non-nameless mountains. Um, and I was overjoyed to be awarded this residency in 2010. So I became their second artist in residence. I got to explore all over Baxter State Park, stayed at a cabin at Daisy Pond with the rangers, got insight into where to go and what to do, and basically just put my hiking boots on and tromped into the wilderness and drew what I saw. It was really sort of a light bulb moment for me. It's like I can explore nature and make art at the same time. And that became a focus for me. So I continued that artist residency scenario by becoming an artist in residence for Acadia National Park in 2012. And then I got really lucky and was awarded a residency at Glacier Bay, Alaska. And this is me at Glacier Bay after 17 plus hours of airline travel, um, standing on the rock, just overjoyed that I'm actually at this wonderful place. Um, Southeast Alaska, where glaciers kind of tide water into the bay, bears, whales, all kinds of great wildlife. It was really a wildlife mecca, and I got to study with some of the biologists at the park, doing whale research, orca research, a little bit of bird stuff. So it was really neat. And artist residencies are this sort of great way for areas, whether wilderness areas or parks or institutions, to acknowledge the fact that art may have had a hand in their creation, basically, or they value the way an artist interprets what their park is about. So, I've had artist residencies, everything from tenting out to a really nice cabin like this one at Hog Island, Audubon. If anybody's been there, I was artist residence in there. Um, but I'm going to talk about my favorite artist in residence to start, and that was the one I was awarded in 2019 in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I will give you a little. This is my favorite picture, I gotta say, of all the sketching pictures. Just that open with the mountains in the background. That was, yeah, I use this one a lot. Makes me feel good. So Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, I just want to tell you a little bit about it. Actually, I can go through and tell you this is sort of the sort of my overview philosophy about being an artist in residence is you can't overlook the importance of wild country as a source of inspiration. Um, and inspiration, we give expression in writing, poetry, drawing, and painting, or just being there. All that stuff goes into my thoughts as I do art out in the wild. And this is, of course, Olaus Murie, who I'll talk about in a second, and his wife, Marty. So Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, it's 19 million acres of land, which is about the size of the state of Maine. It holds the full range of Arctic and subarctic ecosystems, undisturbed and functioning as they have for centuries. It's got the greatest wildlife diversity of any protected area in the circumpolar north. It's recognized as one of the last finest examples of wilderness on the planet. I had heard about this place since my 20s and always wanted to go here. I wanted to figure out, just really see a landscape that was untrammeled, untouched by man, and and to have all these different ecosystems that work together in this giant piece of protected properties. Just like, yeah. So that when I was awarded the residency, I was, needless to say, overjoyed that I would actually be able to do a major exploration here. I want to talk a little bit about Olaus and Marty Murie, who we just saw on the slide. They fought to establish protections after exploring the area on their honeymoon. She was a writer and he was a biologist who studied caribou and wrote and illustrated the Peterson's Field Guide to Animal Tracks. They were both strong advocates for protecting this intact wilderness and lobbied in both Washington and Alaska to put aside a large area of Arctic ecosystem. And in 1956, they surveyed the area with a scientific team, which included a young field biologist named George Schaller. Their efforts were successful when Arctic National Wildlife Range was established in 1960, and then a bunch of land was added to it in 1980 when Jimmy Carter did the Alaska National Lands Claims Act. Um, but it wasn't all completely protected. You'll see on the map here, there's this little green area called Anwar Coastal Plain, which is the 1002 area, which was set aside um, as undecided as what to do with. By this point, they had found oil in Prudhoe Bay. They said there's this other big area. There could be oil here. Let's not decide on this right now. And that was one of the caveats in getting the rest of the refuge established, was that this area was in some sort of gray area, undecided for now is what to do with. So let me tell you a little bit about my project with artist residency. It was with Voices of the Wilderness artist residencies, which connects artists and writers and musicians, poets with Alaska wilderness lands, whether it's a national park, a national wildlife refuge, or national forest. And you go out with a ranger and you do whatever the ranger project is, whether it's exploring campsites on a remote island or removing invasive plants or going up into the Arctic tundra to look at birds, which is what I did. And so I want to play you this little video. I was very fortunate that there was a PR person from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service photographing. She took that photograph of me sketching and doing video, and there's some great promo stuff that was there. So this is a little run through about my project and where I was. Thank you, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That's the video I watch when I'm having a bad day and I'm bummed out about life. Um, so the Arctic tundra, we were part of a ornithology team, as you saw in the video, doing nest surveys of this square mile area, doing transects to find as many different nesting birds as we could. It is a land of detail. There we are tromping through the tundra. That's oftentimes we do our waders because this area gets a lot of it's basically a big wetland. There's grassy high areas, but the geology of the freezing tundra and freezing and thawing makes these low, wetter areas that fill up with water. And there's permafrost and everything. So there's solid ice underneath the soil. So lots of tromping through ponds, ice, water. It was great. Um, we stayed in tented camps with solar powered electric bear fence. And I only point this out because there's my tent in the foreground, the red or the orange and black one, or gold and black one, which happens to be the closest to the bear fence. And apparently, I'm the most expendable member of this group because that was where my tent was. But it was pretty cool. I had a Lapland longspur land on my tent almost every, I want to say evening, but because the sun never went down, there was no real evening or morning. The sun would sort of take a dip into the horizon and go back up again. But the Lapland longspur loved singing on my tent at like 3 a.m. Shorebird nests, which is mostly what we looked for on the tundra, are very cryptic. They do a really good job hiding them, so it was really tricky to find them. This is a nest of a semi-palmated sandpiper, I believe. They tuck them in. And as I mentioned, it's a land of detail. There are so many different things going on in the tundra, and it's a land where no plant grows above 24 inches tall, and most of them are much shorter and smaller. And it looks flat and it looks unassuming, I guess is a good word for it. But if you get down on your hands and knees and look down into the tundra, there are plants and lichens and fungus and moss and insects and bug and just all kinds of stuff going on. And of course, the bird nests and decomposing caribou antlers. And it just the history of the tundra as you look at it was really amazing. There's a painting I did that sort of describes that, the depth of getting involved with getting sucked into a really Lilliputian world of lichen, fungus, baby shorebirds, and tundra, basically. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of bird nerd alert. Some of the birds that I saw and experienced in the tundra through my field sketches. So Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and especially this coastal plain that I was doing my survey work at with a residency, it's locked up in cold and ice for 9 months of the year. So for those 3 months where it isn't freezing cold, all the life needs to pack in as much intense frenzy of activity to be successful as it can. It's a focused explosion of life, which makes the coastal plain a prime place for many birds to breed and fledge chicks. There's fast-growing plants, 24-hour sunlight, a plethora of insects, and an undisturbed habitat, which makes it the bird nesting breadbasket of the North. So the first thing I noticed as I was out with the bird crew doing surveys is that these birds that I'm so regularly familiar with in Maine look completely different. This is a dunlin. The dunlin you usually see is this little grayish brown bird, um, shorebird near the end of shorebird season. And in the Arctic, they are shiny with a big black belly, just awesome. Long-tailed ducks. They almost completely reverse their plumage as far as I can tell. We've got long-tailed ducks around now. They're white with some black markings on them. In the Arctic, they're brown and black with yellow. It's just like it's bizarre, but they make the same noise, and that wonderful long-tail call was um, one of my favorite noises on the tundra that I hear constantly. Excuse me. Rock ptarmigan, which we don't have in Maine. Um, we're also regular visitors to the tundra, and it's interesting that as the snow melts, the females turn brown very quickly, but the males hang on to their white feathers a little longer. And I assume, or I surmise, I guess is a good way to put it, that this might be for the males, would be more of a target standing on the tundra with their white feathers versus the females that are very, very cryptically patterned. Um, so if there's a gear falcon or some predator swooping in to pick out a rock ptarmigan, it's more likely to get the male than the female. Semi-pollinated sandpipers were everywhere. They're probably the most prolific bird on the tundra. Their twittering calls were all over. When the males are doing displays, they can hover right in the middle of the air and just like, just on the wind or whatever, and just they do this twittering call and they just sort of float there like magic. It was really cool to see. Redneck phalaropes were also everywhere, and red phalaropes too. It's a small pelagic shorebird that spends most of its life on the ocean, except for when it comes to the northern tundra to breed. And they've got this little needle sharp bill, and they'll sit in the middle of a tundra pond and they swim around in circles, tight little circles, twirling their feet. And what that does is that stirs up all the invertebrates and all the sort of refuse from the bottom of the tundra pond. And when that comes to the surface, they pick out all the bugs and the invertebrates or whatever the heck they're eating in there. Um, And also interesting bird because in this bird, it's the female that's brightly plumaged and the male is more dull. And the female will mate with the male, lay the eggs, and then the male incubates the eggs and raises the young as much as the shorebird raises the young, which isn't too much, but so that's fascinating. And females can fly around and have multiple nests with multiple males. One of my favorite birds on the tundra, which is one I've seen actually less than half a mile from my house in fall migration, is the pectoral sandpiper. I've got a big farm next to us that occasionally gets plovers and pectoral sandpipers. The pectoral sandpiper, you may or may not have heard of this cool bird. Um, it's got the males grow this big throat chest of black feathers, like a big sort of sack um, that they inflate, and they make this crazy call. And I'll do the call and I'll show you the picture. There's the male flying with his inflated throat sack. He's like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of birds. And their call goes, "Woo, woo, 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 woo." Sounds like a UFO flying around the tundra. And they'll do this. They fly from South America. They make a several thousand-mile journey all the way up to the Arctic. I mean, for whatever thousand miles it is. Excuse me. And they made an elect scenario. So they find this one patch of land and a bunch of pectoral sandpipers will be displaying, trying to get a female to come around. And they'll be flying around doing these displays. And the sad fact is that out of all these male pectoral sandpipers that come up to the tundra, only 25% of them will be lucky enough to breed. So there's 75% of these younger male pectoral sandpipers that do this entire journey, fly all the way up there, spend all this energy flying around trying to display for a mate and are unsuccessful. I'm thinking that reminds me of high school. American golden plovers were one of my favorite birds on the tundra too. They were just, so cool in breeding plumage with the bright golden speckles. Um, and yeah, just fascinating birds. I was very happy to see them. So when I was awarded the residency, I was talking to the various people involved in the project, and I couldn't help but ask about snowy owls. Happens to be my favorite bird. And they mentioned that the year before, there were 6 or 7 snowy owl nests in this small radius of tundra, which got me really excited because, of course, I've never seen a snowy owl nest before. And even just to see a snowy owl in the Arctic would be an amazing experience. I've seen them in Maine plenty, but um, so I got really excited about snowy owls. But snowy owls are very cyclical creatures, and they don't they don't hold to any one nest site. They'll kind of move around depending on what the resource is. So what happens is there's a big lemming boom. A lot of snowy owls come. They eat a lot of lemmings. Lemmings are a boom and bust cycle. So the next year, there's almost no lemmings. And therefore, when I was there were no snowy owls. But I got to see evidence of snowy owls, as you can tell from these sketches. Every hillock had some pellets, had some melted out skulls, had some snowy owl feathers. The evidence of them was cool to see that they had been there. They just weren't there now. Um, it's just an excuse to go back, really. So snowy owls are intimately tied to the lemming population. It's their main source of food when they're in the Arctic. The way they raise their young, they feed them lemmings. The males will make a nest and pile lemmings around the edge of the nest to attract females. Um, and the lemmings live in a subnivean layer during the winter. So they go underneath between the snow and the permafrost, and they make little tunnels all through this layer. But what happens is when the snow melts and when it ices up and when global warming affects that layer, which can either flood it or freeze it, depending on the situation, it can kill a lot of lemmings and affect the population of snowy owls and a lot of other birds. Here's a lemming this is a Greenland collared lemming for your entertainment joy. They are pretty freaking cute. You can see how they blend in, but then they just zip and they're done. So what happens is if there aren't many lemmings around, all the creatures that feed on lemmings need to find a new source of food, like the Arctic fox here with a goose egg in his mouth, um, glaucous gulls, jaegers. There's a whole host of sort of secondary predators that usually eat lemmings, but will switch to bird eggs or bird nestlings if the lemmings are not around. So that's kind of an issue, and that's one of the things they were studying at the on the survey is what affects nest success on the tundra. So this is just a note to show you that the day I flew out, there was a snowy owl that showed up at camp. So they sent me a picture and I sketched it anyways, even though I missed it by a couple hours. Just one lone male looking around. Then he headed out. Um, there is another migratory animal that uses the coastal plain of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as very important habitat, and that's the barren ground caribou. And this is the caribou herds in Alaska are named, and this is the porcupine caribou herd specifically that uses the tundra, the coastal plain where I was stationed for this part. And the porcupine caribou herd is over 200,000 animals. Their presence really brings out the Pleistocene vibe of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge because you can suddenly be enamored with these huge animals that are all over the landscape. They migrate. They come through the mountains. They do a migration of about 800 miles. It's the longest migration of any land animal. And they come to the coastal plain to bear their young. And the reason they come to the coastal plain to bear their young is because it's a big flat open area. They can see predators from fairly far away. Most of the predators need the mountains and the structure of the foothills to raise their young. So they're not as close to the coastal plain as they could be. But the main reason is that it's close to the Arctic Ocean and there's a steady breeze off of the Arctic Ocean and the ice in the Arctic Ocean that keeps the mosquitoes and the bot flies and the warble flies away, all of which are a major issue for the caribou, especially the bot and warble flies that get underneath their skin or lay eggs in their nostril cavities and can cause real havoc. But the migration of the caribou is an amazing sight. I only seen small inklings of it compared to the full, thousands and thousands of animals. When I was first there, we saw a couple caribou one day, and then there was a couple dozen the next day, and then a couple hundred. Um, but I have yet to see the full thousands and thousands of animals. I'm hoping to one day. So part of my project for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was to design this map of bird migration from Arctic refuge to all the different flyways and points throughout the U.S. and abroad that the birds head to after they breed in this one little spot on the tundra. And you can see they go all over the place. Golden plovers fly through Maine on the way back. The redneck phalaropes go down the west coast. Dunlin and red-throated loons go over to Russia. The snowy owls kind of go all over the place. It's amazing to see this one little place, how these migratory birds attach it to so many other places around the world. So I am a man who likes raptors and predators, I have to say. And there was um, one moment when a peregrine falcon flew in and landed on the outhouse that we use at the tented camp. And I was really excited. I took some pictures. I did a quick sketch, finished up later, and it flew off. And it was pretty much the only predator we saw while I was at the um, coastal plain, which is understandable. Predator that the reason the birds are nesting there and the caribou are there is because there's a lack of predators. I know all the ornithologists and the people at camp were very excited about this drawing. I think mostly because I did a sketch of the outhouse. So in 2019, I was the artist in residence, and then I went back in 2022. I forgot to mention that. So this is that coastal plain part is part of sort of a combo of two visits to Alaska that I did to the Arctic. And then I decided that my predator itch needed to be scratched. And in 2024, this summer, I went back and I did the Marsh Fork of the Canning River, which is a float trip where you land up in the mountains and you float down to the foothills on the Marsh Fork of the Canning River, which eventually runs into the Canning River, which eventually runs into where our project was for the bird nesting, but we didn't go down that far. So this is a shot from this summer. This is a video of, to give you some scale, flying in a Cessna 185 onto the tundra landing strip of the Marsh Fork of the Canning. This is in the Brooks Range. Getting scale on those mountains is important because, you know, mountains just look like little foothills until you get some piece of scale in there to say, oh my gosh, that's a lot of wildness. And it sure was. It was very important because we were traveling and not staying in one tented camp. I needed a porter. I needed someone to carry all my junk because as an artist and a photographer, I tend to bring a lot of stuff. So luckily, I volunteered my son Elliot, who was very game to come on this adventure. He's a outdoorsman, rock climber, and very good at carrying my stuff. So I was very happy to have him. Our first day at the Marsh Fork of the Canning, we set up our tents on this little riverbank. And there was a little sort of promontory sticking out onto the riverbank a little bit. And Elliot and I decided that looks like a good place for a tent. And we go out there and get the tent set up. And we're looking around. It's like, I think other things have used this area before because there was like lots of scat around. little piles of poop, mostly older, but lots of wolf poop with caribou hair in it. And that little sketch is the view from our tent. I did some foliage. You can see a few dead mosquitoes on this drawing. And as we explored around further, we saw some rather fresh tracks. I was like, there are definitely wolves here. This is an overlook. You can see where the predators look for prey coming down the riverbank or whatever. And it wasn't too long before our guide called out and said, "There's a wolf." And here's a very quick video of a wolf who is watching us. Alone, probably male wolf, I'm gonna say. Just sort of curiously checking us out. He didn't run away. He sort of stopped, looked at us, lied down for a minute, stood up, looked at us again, trying to figure out what we were. It was just amazing. Just to have a wild wolf check us out was a highlight of my trip, and it was only day one. And here's some field sketches of our wolf friend. We saw this wolf or another one. I kind of think it was this wolf a couple more times as we floated down the river in a couple different areas. We also had lots of ground squirrels, like basically like the Arctic woodchuck. Um, they've got a lot of character. The main thing I like about the ground squirrels, though, is that they're like prairie dogs. They have a big sort of community that they all live underground in. And there's one watch out, and the one sort of lookout ground squirrel will whistle if he sees something up, especially if it's an aerial predator flying around. They have a specific whistle for that, which you can pick up. It's pretty noticeable. Um, so we were hanging out at camp, and then the Arctic ground squirrel whistled. I was like, "What's that?" Golden eagles. There were a couple golden eagles flying around, just circling the mountains. Um, just magnificent. And ground squirrels are prey for a lot of things: the wolves, the golden eagles, other predatory birds. There are lots of other birds in the riverine area of the Marsh Fork that we didn't see on the tundra, like tree sparrows, who are just showing up in Maine now. They breed here. Wandering tattlers. No, it's not your little sister. It's a shorebird that looks a lot like a willet. Um, and it feeds in the streams and the moving water, picks invertebrates out of the moving water. They migrate, I believe, to Africa from Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Crazy amount of distance. Arctic warbler, an old world warbler that has this mechanical trill to its song, and we heard them in almost every campsite, but they're very hard to get a look at. Eventually, I was in the outhouse actually, or the privy. It was a hole. Um, and one popped up right in a tree, and I luckily had brought my camera just in case, so I managed to snap a couple of pictures to use as a frame for sketching. We did a hike up to a plateau where there was a wet area, and there were both upland sandpipers, which flew away before we got a really good look, but also Smith's longspurs, which are really cool to see. And Siberian phlox was everywhere, the flower that's on the bottom of that painting sketch. Another one of my favorite birds. Apparently I have a lot of favorite birds. Um, but this one is a small songbird called the American Dipper. And the American Dipper is one of the few birds that spends the entire winter in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And how does it do that, you ask? Because it gets to be minus 40 and lower, as it finds these little areas of fast moving water where the ice doesn't form. And their mode of finding food is to swim. They swim all year round, hence the name Dipper. They have super waterproof feathers, and they dive underwater, swim to find invertebrates under rocks and stuff, and pop back up and eat them. Really cool bird. I was just like enamored watching them do their diving, swimming around under, and then popping back up again. We managed to see a couple dipper nests. The coolest one was check this out. You can't really see the nest, but I'm going to tell you where it is. They nest in behind the flow of waterfalls where they can find a little area to dip in. They go behind the water sheen and build a nest in a little crevice in the rocks so they have complete cover, and then they pop back in and out of the waterfall. It was really neat to see. We watched this one pop in with food, come back without food. Um, so we knew it was nesting there. I have to say there was one bird I really, really wanted to see in this area. And I wanted to see it so much that I printed it on the front of my sketchbook, just in the hopes that we would run into um, this rather large falcon called a gear falcon. And we had just finished a hike and come back to camp. Finished dinner, we were hanging out, just chatting, and all of a sudden we heard a couple ground squirrels whistle. And we look up, and there's a bird circling over camp, pretty high up, but getting lower. And after some careful looks with the binoculars, the guide said, "That's a gear falcon." And sure enough, whipped out the camera, took as many pictures as I could, did some sketches later from the fact, but it was just like, and it never flapped its wings once. It just circled. It was on a breeze. It circled around camp like 4 or 5 minutes of just lazy loops as it went higher and higher and then disappeared. Um, was really neat. I have an affinity for falcons. I do peregrine falcon monitoring for the state in southern Maine, and just see a gear falcon was very high on my list of things I wanted to do in this area. Well, I got lucky because not only did I see one gear falcon, the next day we were going to do a hike up to a ridge in a different farther down the river. And as we're looking up with the scope, I looked up and saw on the very point of one of those rocks sticking up on the edge of the landscape that I did was a gear falcon sitting there, just hanging out. It just at the very end of the range of my scope to see it, but I did that little sketch looking at it, and then that's where we're going to hike. So we headed uphill. Luckily, I'd brought my porter Elliot along because I think this was right after I passed the scope and the tripod off to him because I couldn't carry it anymore because I'm old and out of shape apparently. But he was into it and he did a great job. Um, and then we hiked up to the ridge where we saw the gear falcon, which was obviously not there, but it was an excellent photo op. And we're looking down on the Marsh Fork of the Canning as it sort of spreads out and runs into the main fork of the Canning River here. The whole group went up together. There was 10 of us, including our two guides. Had lunch, and then everybody else but Elliot and I headed back down to camp. Elliot wanted to explore. As we looked at that ridge line, the guide said it goes on for another several thousand feet up, and you can just sort of walk the ridge line and keep going. Um, I was very happy drawing, sketching rocks, sketching possible gear falcon perches for a painting, just thinking about how great it was to be there. And Elliot told me, "Well, I'm gonna go walk the ridge line for a little while, see what I see." I was like, "That's great. I'll sit here and draw and have a good time." But when you're drawing, you kind of lose track of time, get focused on rocks and landscape and several birds. There was a northern wheatear that was kind of popping in and out of the rocks here that I got to look at. I did a little sketch of him, but it's not in the thing. Um, but I was really enjoying just the view and the experience of being up here. Fun of Kind of oddly, you can see a few flitting around. This was the worst place for mosquitoes that we had the entire trip. I'm at several thousand feet and with wind, and there's still these big mosquitoes that were swarming around everywhere. But just a little clip of me doing my thing, thinking about Falcon, like I said. While I was thinking about this bird, I heard the telltale cry of a falcon calling that, and a falcon zoomed right up that ridge and flew up the ridge towards where Elliot was hiking. And just so fast, there's no way to get a picture. There's no way to, I just saw the shape and I heard the noise. And it was just like, wow, that would, it was, I don't know if it was warning me about the nest. There were a couple of ravens that were in the area. Maybe it was chasing the ravens off. I thought maybe it was flying up to see Elliot, but um, hard telling. Anyways, falcon flies by, and I realized, "Well, how long have I been here for?" So I've been here for an hour and a half drawing and having fun. It's like, geez, where's Elliot? He's been gone a long time. And I went from artist adventure mode to parent mode. Where's my child? He's out in the wilderness alone. He's been gone an hour and a half or more. He had recently dislocated his knee, so I started worrying about that. And I finally, after waiting for another 45 minutes, said, "All right, I need to go look for him." I said, "I can't come home without him. My wife will be really upset. I'll be really upset." So I made a little pile of my stuff so I didn't have to drag it all the way up there and climbed most of the way up the ridge before I looked to the very top. And you can see at the very top of this image, there's a little person coming down the ridge. He finally made it. Man, I was pissed off at him, but also incredibly happy because I looked at the expression on his face as he came down that ridge, and I know he had just had a great, fantastic adventure, being alone and absorbing the wilderness, and I couldn't be mad at him long, just long enough to flip him the bird in one of the pictures that I didn't put in the slideshow. The river, being on the river and having the flow of the river was a really cool experience. And this is just a little quick clip of the river and the geology that we saw in this area. This entire area was a millions of years ago was an ancient seabed, and the layers of sandstone and sediment have been folded and twisted, bent and warped in all kinds of different ways through the forces of geologic time. And this is just a quick sketch I did of some of that. I don't claim to understand all the different ages and twists and turns, but it's fascinating to look at. It's fascinating to think about the history of all that. And because it was an ancient seabed, there were fossils everywhere. All the beaches had little rocks with fossils and shells and fossil corals and stuff. But one really cool thing that we found, that the guide pointed out for us that he had found at a previous trip and brought us to see, were these, at the top of this drawing, of these little chert flakes, napped points. And that really puts the human occupation of this place into perspective. These are little um, shards that somebody broke off making a stone tool. Um, the North Slope was mostly ice-free during the Pleistocene, and there are records of human occupation up to 12,000 years old, perhaps the earliest records of people crossing the Bering Land Bridge into the Americas. It was amazing to think about the fact that this might be the earliest spot of human occupation in North America. And to think about that history and to think about that people were here doing the same thing we were doing. Further on down, the guide showed us another thing he had found and sort of stashed, which was this whale rib scraper. It had little marks on it. Who knows what the meaning is or something. It was probably an old hide scraper. I don't know the antiquity of it. It looked like both ends were cut off very cleanly, as almost if they were sawn. So it may not be as wicked old, but it was definitely, interesting. And it made it, to see this tool that somebody had used. I didn't know the people had been here for so long. There was one spot we stopped where I was thinking about all this and thinking about the fact that there was such a history of people hunting and living off the land in this place. And I sat on this little hillock and I looked down at this valley and I thought about somebody sitting there waiting for a caribou herd to show up or to find mountain sheep or something. Um, and I started sketching and I started just sort of letting that idea flow through me and through my artwork. So here's just a little clip of me sketching. And that's the view as I look down the valley. And that's a little clip of the sketch I did. It was just a moment. When you're an artist, sometimes you get these moments where you feel all these pieces sort of clicking together. And that was one of those moments. As the Marsh Fork of the Canning ran into the Main Fork of the Canning River, there's this very noticeable pyramid-shaped mountain that we saw, and it kind of divides the two river channels from the Marsh Fork, which is a tributary to the Main Fork of the Canning, which is a big river that runs all the way to the Beaufort Sea. And like I said, our bird camp was off the Main Fork of the Canning River. And it was interesting as I was thinking about history here. Um, we also found in that near that area an old caribou antler that had been slowly chewed on by mice and decomposed and had moss and lichen and stuff growing on it. So when I talk about historical human occupation of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, I want to talk a little bit about current human endeavors in Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. This is Prudhoe Bay, 80 miles to the north. The industrial oil extraction and natural gas extraction complex. In 2017, the Tax Act passed by Trump opened the coastal plain for oil extraction. And what they did is they made that one of the refuge's purposes. Remember, I said the 1002 area, the coastal plain, they hadn't decided what the purpose of it was exactly. So, in addition to protecting wildlife habitat and wilderness values, they also added oil and gas extraction as one of its purposes, which, of course, those are completely opposite each other. There's no way that could work. Um, but Congress passed it, squeaked through, of course, and they mandated a couple lease sales. The first lease sale they had at 2019, I believe. I'm not sure exactly when. I think it um, was a disaster. There's no oil company that wants to drill an Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. There's too much public pressure not to. There's no infrastructure to get in there. They'd have to do the expense of it would just be crazy. So the combination of public pressure and expense um, made it kind of a senseless endeavor. Um, Luckily, those oil leases, the few oil leases that were sold, were negated by the Biden administration. And there's another lease sale that's mandated for by the end of this year. Um, and fortunately for that, the Biden administration also will run through that lease sale offering the absolute least amount of land possible. I expect that no oil companies will bid on those leases again. Um, but with the next Trump administration, the drill baby drill mentality, it's going to destroy this fragile ecosystem forever. Not to mention the long range effect of climate change on this area. The Arctic's warming and changing faster than any other place on Earth. The Gwich'in call this coastal plain of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge the sacred place where life begins. It's where the caribou raise their young, and the Gwich'in community especially depends on those caribous for their very existence. They hunt them, they use every part of the caribou. It's part of their cultural heritage. With global warming, the changes in freeze and thaw cycle can affect large ungulates who are trying to make it through the winter and scrape through to find enough food to eat, including this musk oxen who didn't make it. It wasn't able to dig through the maybe frozen ice from the spring that it couldn't get through to get that last meal to make it through. So, but there is some reason for hope. You know, Susan Collins, our great senator from Maine, has said that she is against drilling an Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in the past, and hopefully we can hold her to that. I don't have high hopes of that, but pressure from the public will help. And I just want to talk a little bit about the resilience of shorebirds. I talked about how fragile their breeding season and success is, but they're also incredibly resilient. Management studies showed Wimbrel using hurricane winds to rocket their southward migration. And semi-palmated sandpiper chicks make a huge migration from the Arctic to South America, with the final leg spanning a flight of over 2,400 miles. And they do this never having been to their destination and with no parental supervision. They just figure it out. So I'm going to flip you through some of my paintings. I can talk a little bit about this one specifically. Um, this one's called Arctic Offering, and it's a snowy owl on the edge of a melting tundra where you can see the tundra is kind of sloughing off into the ocean. It's collected a few lemmings to try to entice a female snowy owl to mate. It's a young male. But it's not having much success because there's not a lot of lemmings due to the changing climate. So that's the sort of theme of that painting. But so what can art do to help Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? We've become painfully aware that facts have a limited effect on people's attitudes and behavior, but stories and the connections they make can change your ideas, and the Arctic Refuge has many stories to tell. As you recall, I mentioned Olaus Murie and his study to create the refuge, and one of the young scientists who was with them was a man named George Schaller, who he was in his 20s then. He became the most preeminent wildlife biologist in the world by anybody's standards. He studied mountain gorillas, he studied pandas, lions, snow leopards, an amazing force for biological diversity. And he has this great quote. He said, "You can do the best science in the world, but unless emotion is involved, it's not really very relevant. Conservation is based on emotion, and it comes from the heart, and one should never forget that." So science and facts, like I said, have a limited effect, but art has a way to trigger emotions. So I will flip you through a few pieces of my art while I read a little thing that I wrote. Oh, wait. I'll just read the little thing I wrote while I show you this, actually. All right. Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is one of the last places on Earth where we can see the living grandeur of how the world works without the presence of humankind, a world before we became the grand engineers of our environment. It's a place against which we can test our wisdom, or lack thereof, for what we as a species have done to this earth. Few people will have the opportunity to visit here to see snowy owls, sandpipers, gyrfalcon, and caribou. But aren't we better off as a culture knowing this little part of the world has been left to its own devices? The shorebirds think so, and it's my heartfelt belief that in the coming years we will need these unspoiled places to come back to for science, for spirituality, for inspiration, and for hope. As Samwise Gamgee said, there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. On that note, I'm going to show you just a little clip of a 1 minute video I made about my trip to the Arctic tundra. My name is Michael Boardman. I'm a wildlife artist who specializes in birds from North Yarmouth, Maine. In 2019, I was selected to be the Voices of the Wilderness artist in residence for Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and realized a lifelong dream of exploring the coastal plain. Field sketching is my way to connect with place. I can observe and record. It's the intersection of art and science, and it builds a personal connection for me with the wildlife and the landscape. Observing and sharing these stories of the natural history of the Arctic gives my work purpose. During the pandemic, when I was unable to return to the Arctic, I realized the Arctic was coming to me. Maine is on the migratory paths of many bird species who nest on the tundra. Shorebirds in the spring and fall, and snowy owls in winter became my way to continue the stories of my Arctic companions and keep a piece of the refuge in my heart. To quote the great wildlife biologist George Schaller, conservation is based on emotion. One should never forget that. And art serves to stir these emotions and make connections to the stories of nature. The birds have such fascinating stories to tell. They weave us together in the great tapestry of the natural world. All right, gone a little bit over. I'm just going to flip through a few paintings quickly that you can take a look at. These are all birds from the coastal plain. I've yet to do paintings from my trip this summer. It takes a long time to sort of get them out. Here's a gyrfalcon, actually. But if you want to help Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and get involved, first thing you can do is follow me on social media because I talk about it all the time. But Alaska Wilderness League, Friends of Alaska National Wildlife Refuges are two organizations that especially focus on protection of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and are worth getting involved with. I'm animate too. And I would be remiss if I didn't show this picture of my son Elliot with a giant grayling he caught on a fly rod, his first fly rod fish. It's a type of trout slash salmon, and that fish at, I don't know how big it is, but it's probably between 30 and 40 years old. It takes them so long to grow. We let it go soon after we took that picture. And if you want to keep in touch with me, I'm on Instagram. You can check out my art website. My graphics company, Coyote Graphics, does wildlife t-shirts. Every t-shirt you buy supports another trip to Alaska. So that's it. I would be very happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
A true pleasure to have you. We don't have too many questions yet, but I had a couple.
Cool.
You referred earlier to that little video clip from that Anwar produced
Yes.
that you said you enjoy watching it periodically because it brings it right back. And one of the people watching felt the same way and would like to see it also, be able to. So do you know by any chance where it could be found online?
I will give you a link. Yeah, that's a good question. It's on YouTube. If you put Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, I'm not sure
That's okay.
exactly how to find it. I'll share a link with you, Bill, and you can put it out when we mail the thing
Okay.
out.
I will do that. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
it's public. Yeah, it's public because it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Anybody can use it and view it and do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
Public domain.
And do you have any plans to return? And
I,
and
I
if not there, do you have any other notable travel plans in your near future in the next year or so?
I'm hoping to return and do more exploring of the natural history of the North Slope of Alaska and especially Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Um, my plan is to try to put all these field sketches I've done into some sort of informal guide to the refuge and to the natural history of the Arctic ecosystem. As fast as it's changing, I think it's important to record it and just I feel like that's the best way for me to get the word out about this really cool place and all the cool connections between the birds and the habitat and the geology and mammals and everything. So that's a long range plan that I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Oh, sounds good. Couple more questions. Uh, People are concerned, apparently. They would like to know if you and your son had trouble sleeping when you were up there.
No. You have pretty full days at every time, whether I was on the Arctic tundra, following the field crew around, or after the hikes and paddling of the raft trip. You're I was pretty spent by the end, and I did not have any problems passing out, even though it was still light
Yeah.
out. And I
And
just adjusted very quickly to that. And Elliot did pretty good too. Yeah. Not
that's
a
great.
problem. We had to make sure not to get mosquitoes in our tent. That was the major concern. But
Yeah.
they weren't even that bad considering some images I've seen of mosquitoes on the North Slope.
Right.
Pretty
And you
lucky.
mentioned when you did the program recently that the temperature was pretty mild when you were there.
Yeah, yeah, I've been pretty lucky. When I was on the when I was on the coastal plain, we got snow on the summer solstice. And there were a couple times where the weather was cold enough that we didn't do bird surveys because we didn't want to disturb the birds off the nest. But this most recent trip in the mountains, it was in the 70s and almost 80 several days, which was kind of crazy. It was great. I mean, Ellie and I went swimming in the Marsh Fork of the Canning, which was a brief endeavor into very cold water, but um, yeah, it was warmer than I expected.
And another question, when you were in the residency there, did you have a specific project in mind that you wanted to complete uh, when you presented your application?
Yeah, I actually presented my application with the idea to do that migratory map, um, to show the birds migrating from point A of the refuge to all the different places they spread out to. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, when, they looked at my application and they were looking for, it was really, it was like kismet almost because I specifically spelled that out. They were looking for a bird artist from the lower 48 states who could take the story of all the migratory birds and spread it out throughout, wherever they live. So it was, you know, I was just what they're looking for, and I managed to have the right message at the exactly right time. So I worked on that, and the list of birds they gave me was, I think I had seen every bird on that list within an hour of my house. So all the birds that they were all birds I was familiar with. It was really
Yep.
cool. That was a that was a neat
Were
trip.
there any other mammalian predators there besides wolves and foxes?
There were bears, but I had to sit through 8 hours of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service bear training to not see a single bear any of the times that I'd been to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. There was one clump of woolly bear hair that was on the outhouse from earlier in the season that I got to sketch, but I have yet to see a bear there. I did go when I went in 2022. I went to Utqiagvik Barrow before I went to the refuge and saw a polar bear in the wild there, which was really neat.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a sketch of a polar bear?
I do have a sketch of a polar bear. It's not part of Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, so it's not in the.
Yeah. Didn't
Check
make the
my
cut.
Instagram.
Yeah. Good. Uh, what were the dates that you were there with Elliot?
So Elliot and I went from the 20th to July 2nd, I want to say. And then the residency was basically a week earlier. It was like the middle of June to the end of June,
Yeah,
which is right when that sort of it was a great overlap with seeing the birds on their nests, checking the eggs, and then seeing birds hatch and seeing fledglings of the shorebirds, which was awesome. It's
yeah.
such a special experience.
One of our viewers, Skip Green, I don't know if that's someone you know,
Yeah.
says he was there in the middle of June in 2008.
Oh,
So
awesome.
similar timing.
Nice.
So I think that's it. It's
Awesome.
been a delight to have you. Thanks so much for doing this again, so more people could share it both tonight and in the future.
It's my
And
pleasure.
look forward to seeing you on the trail.
Awesome. Happy holidays, everybody. Happy birding.
Same here. Good night, everyone.